Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. I'm joined this morning by Paul Takahashi. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you. Paul, if we could just start out, if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Paul Takahashi. I'm a retail reporter for the Houston Chronicle. I've been at the Chronicle for about a year and a half now, and covering retail for the most part. But previously, I was at the Houston Business Journal covering real estate for about 3 years, and I was covering residential. So that's how I got to know everybody here at HAR. I would, of course, cover the monthly home sales reports, and I covered both single family and multifamily housing. And so I have a little bit of experience in both. But I'm originally from New Jersey, and I've been in Texas for about 5 years, or nearly 5 years now, but lived all over the country. I went to school in Chicago. Previously, before moving to Houston, I was in Las Vegas for about 4 years beforehand. So
very good.
Lived all over the country.
So you've seen a lot, to say the least.
I have. Yeah, lots of different.
So a little birdie told me that when you moved from Las Vegas to Houston, you used HAR.com to find your home.
I did indeed. Yeah. That was the app that we used. It had sort of the best kind of data in terms of sort of sales numbers and figures, and so we use that, and the app is pretty robust, so we ended up using that.
Well, good. We're glad you did.
Thank you.
So you said prior to coming to Houston to cover real estate for the Houston Business Journal, now with the Chronicle, that you were in Las Vegas and you were doing education?
Yes, that's right. I was covering
So
K-12
how was it making that
higher ed.
transition from doing education to residential real estate in Houston?
It wasn't so difficult. There are a lot of ties between all the beats that I covered to housing. So in education, if you have a strong community, you tend to have a strong school, and vice versa. If you have a strong school, you tend to attract a strong community. And in retail too, it's the big saying is retail follows rooftops, and so a lot of connections there. And people want to know when they buy a house, where's the nearest grocery store, and where's the nearest shops, and people want to go out and do things on the weekends, and so it's a big draw for a community. So and in education, K-12, higher ed, they're all dealing with real estate. So Las Vegas was one of the fastest growing school districts in the country at one point, and very similar to Houston, was growing big numbers in terms of student enrollment, and they had to build schools. And so you had to buy real estate and build new schools, and very similar to what's happening in Houston suburbs. They're buying real estate, they're building new schools. And so very similar in that respect. And I also got a chance to cover, Las Vegas didn't have a stadium like we do here in Houston with NRG, and before that, the Astrodome. And so there was a lot of talk about how do we build a stadium, how do we build arenas? And I covered the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, a big university there. And they were pushing to build a stadium for their football team. And so a lot of real estate deals there behind that. And so I got to cover a little bit of real estate, even though I was covering education.
Yeah. So, excuse me, what are some trends you're seeing as far as retail development, and then also just how that relates to residential? Because like you said, it follows rooftops. So.
Sure. Well, retail is in a state of transition right now. It's you read the headlines and you think the world's falling. Often you hear about all the bankruptcies and different things that are going on with retailers, and how, like all of us, we're all trying to deal with how do we interact with this new medium called the internet, and realtors, of course, having to figure out, all right, how do we sell homes, and how do we market our homes online, and in media, we're also trying to deal with, all right, how do we deliver our content to our readers online and through mediums like Facebook? And so retailers are doing the same thing. They've got e-commerce is a big driver right now of retail, and so they're all trying to figure out what's the best balance, brick and mortar versus online. And so you're seeing a lot of headlines about closures, Gap and Victoria's Secret and Chico's and all these other retailers, Mattress Firm, they're all closing stores. And you think, oh my goodness, like what's going on? But in terms of the Houston retail real estate market, it's not as dire as people think it is. It's actually quite strong, and occupancy rates 95%, very low vacancy rates. You see very little spec construction going on in retail right now, and so it's a very strong in terms of healthy fundamentals. And even construction, as you were talking about, we have about 2.5 million square feet of new shopping centers and stores in the pipeline right now, expected to be delivered in 2019, and that's a pretty healthy number. It's down from last year, but it's still within the historical norms of about 2.7 million over the last decade. So it's not a very dire situation, as you might read in the papers and online, and so that's something important to know. But you've got a lot of people making moves. H-E-B, for example, they are trying to open 7 new stores this year. You've got Aldi's opening 6 new grocery stores this year. You have Sprouts and Whole Foods. They're each opening new stores, 1 new store each this year. Costco's opening 1 in Cyprus, expected this year. And so, there are retailers that are opening new stores. I wrote recently about Duluth Trading Company. They're new to Houston. They sell sort of outdoor gear for both men and women. And they're opening 2 stores, 1 in Friendswood, 1 in Katy. And they're each about 16,000 square feet. So they're not huge stores, but, it's great to see new retailers coming into the market. And there is, as one retailer closes, for example, Randall's, they've been scaling back their Houston operations, closing a number of stores. You've seen El Rancho, a Hispanic grocer from Dallas, come in and taking down that space. And so there's been, it's a constant evolution in terms of retail, but it's not this crazy apocalypse that I think people like to think it is right now.
Yeah, that was actually my next question for you was, as you see that some of these stores may close, what is filling in those spaces? Is it something new? Is it like another H-E-B, or is it something brand new that we haven't seen before?
Sure. So. It's a mix of both, right? So you've seen, these big boxes. So Randall, for example, they close, 3 or 4 different stores around, they've been closing a number of stores over the years, but 3 or 4 have been taken up by El Rancho. It's new to Houston, and they're interested in taking down that space and selling food to our community. And so they're making inroads here. Even Mattress Firm, they closed a number of stores in the Houston area, but a lot of people were saying, well, these are in good locations and end caps of shopping centers and with high visibility. So, people don't seem to be, brokers that I talk to, they don't seem to be all that worried about, some of these retail boxes that are closing. They seem to be all taken up by different people. And I think the big concern, for example, Sears, I forgot to mention Sears Midtown, for example, Rice taking that over and turning it into an innovation district. Yeah. So lots of different uses. That's a great improvement. And people are thinking really creatively outside the box. Entertainment venues, fitness centers, gyms, all these things that people want to do. Restaurants are a big draw right now too. So a lot of these big retail boxes are being converted into other uses that are going to serve the community. I think the one major concern that people do have are malls. So, we have several malls that are doing very well right now. Galleria, the Mineral City, Baybrook, all these other malls that are doing well. But we also have a number of malls that aren't doing very well. And what do we do to repurpose those? And these are very big, of course, chunks of real estate, and
it's a big impact on the community.
It's a big impact on the community, right, to lose them all. And how do we fill that? We don't have a big, all these big department stores, they're not taking down, they're not expanding right now. So who's going to replace that Sears that's closing in a neighborhood? And so people have to really think creatively what to do with that space, break it up, re-tenant, and in some cases, tear down malls and build something new. So Northwest, of course, lots of questions there about how are we going to make this into a high-speed rail station, for example. So it's always interesting to see what comes, but it's not like where retailers are putting their stores. It's typically in a location where you've got a lot of people nearby and people with disposable income, and so in that sense, these are not empty tracts of land in the suburbs that, are far out excerpts that there's always a question, are people going to move out that far? These are always typically in areas where there are neighborhoods. And so it's typically a question of how do we repurpose this space?
That makes sense. So heading into a different subject here, just because we're curious and because Nancy Sarnoff, when she joined us a few months ago, she had something that actually surprised us a little bit as her answer. But what type of articles do you see interest readers the most?
Sure. Anytime I write about grocery stores, I think that's the big draw.
That was Nancy's answer too.
Grocery stores people are always curious about what new grocery stores are coming into their neighborhood, and it's something that impacts all of us, right? We like to eat. We're Houstonians, and we love our restaurants, and we love our food, and it's something that people do every day. Everybody from every walk of life, they go to a grocery store and they eat food and cook at home, and so
also a good mix of different kinds of grocery stores. Houston's so diverse.
Right.
People have different tastes and interests and things like that. So
absolutely,
it's important for us to have more than just one type of grocery store.
Right. And it's interesting, all the new grocers that enter the market. Aldi, several years ago, they made strides in our market. They're expanding, like I said, 6 new stores this year alone, and they've been opening a whole bunch. And they're a low-cost grocer. You have to, even to get a grocery cart, you have to, put a quarter in and get a grocery cart. And you see El Rancho, we talked about a little bit earlier. They're new to Houston as of a couple years ago, and they're coming in from Dallas and bringing more Hispanic focus to their grocery stores. And you've got a lot of different grocers making moves. H-E-B, of course, is the biggest player right now in the market. They've got a 27% share, 95 different stores around the Houston area, and they're making a big push in brick and mortar, opening 7 new stores this year. And but also at the same time, they're also making big moves online. So you've got the opportunity, both with Kroger, Walmart, H-E-B, you have the opportunity to order your groceries online and pick up at the store, drive up, they put it in your trunk and you can drive away, or you can even have your groceries delivered to your home right now. So a lot of different interesting things going on at the grocery right now, and a lot of different players, especially after Amazon acquired Whole Foods a couple years ago for, I think it was $13 billion and change. That was a big shock to the grocery industry. How do we compete with Amazon and with this online e-commerce giant? And a lot of people started making big moves in e-commerce. So H-E-B, they acquired this food delivery app called Favor, based out of Austin, and they're trying different ways to get people to buy groceries online. And so it's been very interesting to cover all of that.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I'm going to take a look to see if we have any questions coming in from our members. If you have a question for Paul, type it into the comments, and he will do his best to answer that for you. A lot of people telling you good morning.
Good morning back.
So Nancy has kind of a general question here. She just said, what's happening in the residential market? I mean, I know your focus is mainly retail. Do you have any thoughts on the residential real estate market?
Sure. So I live out in the Cypress area, sort of near 290 and the Grand Parkway, and retail always follows rooftops, and so there's a lot of new home starts out in where I live, and sort of even in the northwest quadrant of Harris County as a whole, lots of new master plan communities. And for a long time, I think there had been, of course, retail out there, but not new retailers, a lot of mom and pop shops, a lot of chains. But you're starting to see bigger tenants moving out there, and they're sort of a wave of sort of larger retail developments that have cropped up in recent years. And so even in our neighborhood, there's been restaurants from inside the loop coming out to our area, pretty far out too. And that's been really interesting to see. So like Jinya Ramen, they've got a number of different shops, ramen shops inside the city, Midtown, and in hip areas. And they just recently opened up an area outside in Cypress. And so you're starting to see a lot of retailers thinking about, all right, we've got this huge mass of this population that's living out in the suburbs and the exurbs, and how do we serve that community? And even hospitals are thinking that way too. You've seen a lot of suburban hospitals expand, and even urban hospitals, Memorial Hermann, others, UTMB, they're all thinking, all right, how do we get urgent care centers? How do we get smaller regional hospitals in the suburbs closer to where consumers are? And so the housing growth is really driving all of this, right? So, home builders, developers that are building more and more homes in the suburbs, and all the businesses are thinking about, all right, how do we build offices? How do we build shops? How do we build restaurants to serve that community? And so I think that's been a big story here in Houston, and that's been going on for, of course, decades. But recently, of course, with the Grand Parkway, that's really accelerated a lot of that. It's allowed that new road around Houston has allowed new housing developments to open up and new businesses. I think along the Grand Parkway alone, I think there were more than 11 new shopping centers that have been built in the last several years. And so that's really driving a lot of that development out there.
Absolutely. We had Patrick Jankowski a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned that out west, there's just been so much development. He actually said that Houston used to end at Highway 6, and now it goes way beyond that. Right. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been incredible to see that population center kind of moving west a little bit too, and all the way out to Katy and beyond, Richmond. All of that's growing out there.
Right.
So,
and it's great for us to hear that, like you said, the retail is going to follow that, because our members are selling homes to people, and like you said, they're going to want to know what's coming up around here. When are we going to get a grocery store?
Sure. Yeah, when I was looking for a house myself, my wife and and I were discussing, all right, where do we want to buy? Of course, we wanted good schools for our young daughter, and the next question was, what's nearby? What can we do on the weekends? Where can we shop? Where's the nearest grocery store? And so those are very important questions that I think realtors get asked all the time. What's in the neighborhood?
Sure, absolutely. All right. So Cindy actually asked, what are the hottest areas in the greater Houston area?
In terms of housing, or in terms of retail, I think inside the loop, I think you're seeing a lot of, activity in terms of retail development in the Heights area. I think that's been quite interesting for me to cover. A lot of things, sort of mixed use developments, like Heights Mercantile have opened up in the Heights area. Earlier, I covered the HEB Heights market that opened up recently, and
that was a big story.
Yeah, that was a big story. I mean, I drove by there the other day, and you can't find parking during rush hour in some parts, and so it's been a big driver for a lot of change going on, especially in that Shepherd quarter in the Heights. New restaurants opening up, and especially after HEB made their announcement that they were going to open up a new store, you've seen a lot of new restaurants opening up, a lot of new shops, and you see that renaissance. And the Heights, of course, used to be very residential for a long time, but I think it's changing right now. You're seeing a lot of new retail and mixed use moving in, and a lot of apartments, and there is a little bit of tension there, I think, in the community about what's the right mix and what's the right balance. But it's been interesting to see that transition happening. So I would say that's definitely a hot market for retail developers inside the city, and of course for housing as well. You see a lot of new homes being built in that area right now. I mean, all over the city you're seeing new housing and new retail coming up, so it's hard to say what the hottest areas are, but
I have a question for you.
Sure.
On the heels of Hurricane Harvey, we all know the certain shopping centers that got water and things like that, and were flooded. Even just down the street over here in Meyerland, a lot of Meyerland stores closed temporarily. Some never opened back up. Are you seeing that retailers is there confidence in opening a store in an area they know flooded during Harvey, or what are you seeing there?
Sure. Well, I think there is some trepidation and concerns about flooding, of course,
Sure.
everywhere. And so, HEB, for example, they had a store in Ireland for many, many years, and
Right.
they decided, well, look, it flooded several times in the last several years, and we just can't keep, rebuilding. And so they said, we're going to close down that former Mylan store and open up a new one. And it's going to be a double decker, and it's going to be in Mylan Plaza, and they're building it right now. And I think it's set to open later this year. And so there is, of course, concerns about flooding. And I think for retailers, it's very difficult because I think the stat is, 2 years after a major natural disaster, if you're not able to open up by that point, most likely you're going to close. And so, for a lot of folks, this is a very tight margin business in terms of selling items or selling groceries. It's, you're operating on very small margins. And so every month that you're closed, it gets that much more difficult to reopen.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very tough thing after something like Harvey. But, you look out in Kingwood, for example, there were a number of stores out there that shopping centers out there that but I've talked to many others that have reopened, and I think Houston's a very resilient city. And,
Absolutely.
there are a lot of small business owners who say, well, this was a tragic event, but we're going to rebuild and move on. And you would hope that an event like that was hopefully a once in a lifetime event.
Yeah.
But I guess you never really know in a city like Houston. So it's
good
very
to
tough. Yeah.
So Babak asked, where are you seeing the most activity for retail development? You mentioned earlier kind of everywhere, but is there a specific area?
I mean, all over. Definitely, I think the Grand Parkway has been a big driver for retail development right now. And like I said, I think there were about a dozen or so new developments, new shopping centers that have opened up all along the Grand Parkway. Earlier, I covered a new shopping center called Katy Asia Town that opened up off the Grand Parkway and I-10. Anchored by a 40,000 square foot H Mart, a Korean grocery store, and surrounded by lots of different, tea shops, and there's a cream puff shop and lots of different restaurants. And it's all sort of an Asian themed shopping center. And a lot of people are saying, well, this may be the next sort of Chinatown or Asia Town in Houston, outside of Bel Air. And so you're seeing a lot of development that's moving out west, moving out northwest, all along the Grand Parkway. I think that's been a big driver over the last several years of new development, retail development. Yeah.
Very good. So Caroline asked, what areas are good for investors?
Sure. Well, we've seen a lot of interesting investments going on, both inside the loop and outside. I think what an interesting sort of opportunity for investors is sort of what we talked about earlier, these malls that are not doing as well. And you've seen a lot of groups that have taken on the challenge of redeveloping a mall that's been struggling and are closing stores. And what can we do with that space? And so, San Jacinto, for example, Fidelis is looking to redevelop that mall in Baytown and, put more restaurants and put more entertainment in. You've seen a group of investors in sort of the West Oaks Mall sort of thinking about, all right, how do we turn this into an outlet center? And, how do we turn the empty boxes into something different? Some retail that people may actually go and shop for that community.
Right.
And so a lot of different retail real estate investments going on, I think, in converting these formerly closed stores into something different. And so it's always interesting to see what people think of, axe throwing, a lot of different things that people are, very creative thinking about how do we turn these places into something that excites people and brings people out.
Maybe entertainment.
Entertainment, right. Not just a store, right. Or restaurants. The restaurants have been very big. You look at the Galleria, for example, Simon Property Group, they're thinking about, all right, how do we turn, we've created more space for our retailers. What do we do with the old space? Or, well, all right, we'll take the old Saks Fifth Place and turn it into more restaurants and high-end restaurants. And you've got Nobu now opening that has opened, and Blanco and all these other restaurants, high-end restaurants that have opened up. And so all of this takes investors sort of thinking creatively about different spaces and real estate, and thinking, all right, well, how best to repurpose it? What's the highest best use?
Michelle asked, how do you feel the development, in Katy for a new town center with waterways similar to what's in the Woodlands would impact the immediate community?
Yeah, I mean, Katy, I think, has a lot of, has some mixed use there already. La Centera is a big mixed use development out there. It does have a sort of a small, it has a lake, I think, near there. Yeah, it would be interesting to see what sort of a lakefront, type of, maybe waterway kind of mixed use would do. I think it's always a big draw. Investors are investing very heavily in developing mixed use. It's not just about creating an area where people can shop, but it's also an area where people can live, people can eat, people can work out, and it's all about sort of creating lifestyle centers. And so, I think Katy would be, Katy has some of that already, but I think it would not be a place that, I think it would be a place that would do well. More mixed use. So, and you're seeing more of that moving out to the suburbs. In my neck of the woods out in Cypress, we've got Town Lake, the boardwalk at Town Lake. It's a community that is anchored by lakes, and people can ride their motorboats to go eat at the shopping center or to go shop. And it's been a kind of interesting community amenity out there, and it's a big draw. People come out, and there are events and farmers markets, and people run around on a big open green space, and it's definitely, mixed use is definitely a big trend right now in retail and in real estate right now. So I don't see that going away. Right.
A couple more questions just popped up. Are there any traditional non-food retail businesses that are expanding?
Sure. Well, recently I covered a story about Imperfect Produce. They're a grocery delivery company that has a kind of a unique twist. You might have seen ads on Facebook or on social media, but they sell sort of produce that wouldn't have made it into the grocery store. So it's sort of imperfect in a little ways. It's got cosmetic damages, a little scarring, or it's too small or too big, or it doesn't have the right color or shape. And this startup out of San Francisco, they're looking at selling this produce direct to consumers through kind of a subscription box service. And they've recently launched in Houston, and they're shipping boxes of produce to people here. And it's kind of a unique, non-traditional kind of retail outlet. And they're trying to sell produce for a little bit cheaper than you would find at a grocery store, and at the same time kind of reuse or find a good use for produce that probably would have been thrown away or tilled into the ground. And so that's kind of a unique retailer that's recently come into the Houston market that you wouldn't really think is a retailer, but they sell produce and they're a competitor to grocers. So it's been interesting to see some of that going on.
Good. Monica asked, which areas are getting the most foot traffic?
In terms of malls, there are high-performing malls that are doing well, like the Galleria. I think they get more than 30 million, visitors a year, and so that's been a big draw for both tourists and locals alike. You have other regional malls that are doing well too, and then you have malls that aren't doing so well. And so it's I would say all across the city, people wherever people are living, whether it's in the suburbs, League City or Richmond. I mean, all of these places you need shops and restaurants for people to go. I think right by Aliana, sort of in the Richmond, Sugar Land area, that's been a big growth area, of course, for both homes and for retail. I covered, of course, the new next gen Target that opened up there. That was kind of a new model that Target is is working on trying to get people to shop in store, pick up in store, and trying to create both a leisure shopping experience, but also kind of a quick grab and go shopping experience too for people who don't want to spend hours there shopping. And so, it's a new model that they opened up, and it was the first in the whole country to open here in the Houston area, in Richmond, in the Sugar Land area. And so that was an interesting thing. That there's going to be a Flix, sort of like a brew house opening up where you can drink beer and watch a movie and eat all in the same place. And that's opening up out there in sort of the Aliana area. So that's been a big hot area for new retail development, I would say.
So we have a question here about zoning. Rumina just said, why does Houston not have any zoning? I know we have restrictions in some areas. Can you shed some more light on this?
Sure. Yeah. So Houston doesn't have zoning, but in the traditional sense, but there are a lot of areas of town where you have deed restrictions, and that is sort of our de facto zoning. And in terms of housing, there are HOAs and there are covenants when you buy a house, and so all of that kind of plays into you can't necessarily build whatever you want, but there are areas, of course, in the city where a developer can buy and they can build, as long as they're within the deed restrictions, they can build sort of whatever they want. We don't have traditional zoning in the sense that this area is for industrial, this area is for retail, this area is for residential. We don't have that level of zoning. So that's why you see shopping centers crop up and near industrial, or vice versa, near residential. And so that's been an interesting part coming in from New Jersey, where we have very strict zoning and, multifamily development in sort of the center of the city is sort of new, and, it sparks a lot of debate. Here, it does spark some debate in some projects, but for the most part, there's the lack of zoning allows developers to build new housing and apartments more quickly. And so it also allows for faster development, and that's, I think, in a sense, allowed Houston to grow very quickly. Now, of course, there's concerns about are we doing right by our community? Are we building too quickly in areas that may be more prone to flooding? And so, that's always a concern. But in the sense that, are we able to build and keep our housing affordable? I think that's the lack of zoning has, in a lot of ways and in a lot of people's eyes, has helped keep housing affordable here in Houston.
Yeah, very good. So I have another question for you. Just, we've talked a lot about what you're seeing right now. What do you foresee in the next maybe 3 to 5 years as far as retail or residential, or really both?
Sure. Well, I think covering, retail, I think a lot of people are always worried about, it's been, several years since the '08 financial crisis and the crash there and the recession. And are we due for another slowdown, another recession in the coming years? And you see a lot of retailers, big retailers. I cover Cisco, for example, and Group 1 Automotive, for example. They're all thinking about, all right, what's on the horizon? What's coming in the next couple of years? Are we due for a slowdown? And I cover monthly car sales right now. Switch from home sales to car sales, and there are differences, of course, between cars and homes, but they're both very good indicators for where the economy is headed.
Yeah.
And just as with homes, car sales have been slowing down a little bit, and due to rising interest rates, that's been a big factor in why you see so many people gravitating towards the used car market, because they're being priced out of the new car market right now. And people are forecasting nationally maybe a little less than 17 million new cars sold across the country. And so it's a little bit less than it was in prior years. And is that a sign of where our economy is headed? We're not totally sure, but it is a sign, another indicator that says, well, maybe we might have a slowdown coming our way in the future. And so, we track, sales of cars and homes. These are, for a lot of families, the largest purchases that people make, and so it's a good indicator for where our economy is headed.
there's also so much development with cars and, the Tesla models and the self-driving cars. There's just a lot going on in that industry.
Yeah, just last week, Tesla, for example, they said, well, we've had a lot of these stores where we sell our retail, not in Texas, of course, where we've got some regulation around sale of new cars only through franchise dealers. But in other states, Tesla was selling cars through stores. And, it was for a lot of different reasons. I think, regulations was one of them. But Tesla decided, well, we're going to sell cars just online. And I think part of that reason had to do with e-commerce. People like to buy things online. And just as people are starting to think about how do we buy and sell homes online, people are starting to think, all right, well, how do we sell and buy cars online too? So something that we would never really have thought of, a decade ago, but it's here, and it's really going to change, I think, the game for a lot of people.
That's great. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful, telling us about all kinds of stuff that we don't typically hear about here. Great. So I really do appreciate you coming and joining us this morning.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, please, it's the work that the Houston Chronicle does is really important to our community, and we hope to really be a resource to the community and bring you news and information that is important to you and your business. And so please subscribe if you get a chance, HoustonChronicle.com. And on the business desk, we have, of course, our Texas Inc. Weekly edition that comes out every Monday. And that's a big draw for a lot of business movers and shakers. We have CEO interviews in there, and actually, this Monday's edition is full of car information. So if you're interested about buying a new car, or there's a CEO with CEO interview with Ducati. There's a interview with, of course, the folks at Group One talking about buying and selling cars online. So if you're interested in any of those things, feel free to subscribe to Houston Chronicle, and you'll get a copy of Texas Inc., our new business publication. And
you guys have several podcasts as well, specifically Nancy's podcast.
Yes, Nancy Sarnoff, our residential and commercial real estate reporter. She does a weekly podcast called Looped In. It's actually a very popular podcast, and very similar to HER's On the Move podcast, and in the sense that we have people on talking about real estate, and it's all a podcast all about real estate. And so if you're at all interested about what's happening in housing, what's happening in commercial real estate, feel free to download from HoustonChronicle.com and take a listen. She does a great job with it. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Yeah. So next week we will be back, same time, same place. We are actually going to have Grant Harpold again. He is HAR's legal counsel, and he's going to give us a legal update. And as you can guess, legal updates, maybe some people may not want to tune in for that, but he is so entertaining and always brings us so much information. And he's one of our most popular guests on here because people just love to hear his perspective. So for those of you that are watching, be sure to be back next week for another legal update with Grant Harpold. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.